Okay, welcome to this Century Showcase in partnership with Forest School. We are talking today about facilitating data-driven teaching at Prep and Senior. My name is Helen Stride. I'm a former head of maths and now a curriculum lead at Century. For those who have just joined, I've just seen the participant numbers just jump up. It's great if you want to introduce yourself in the chat. Remember, if you do want everyone to see it, select panelists and attendees, not just panelists, so that you can say hello to everyone. So we've so far had some hellos from people in India, from people in the UK and around the world. So welcome to you all. So we'll get started in just a moment. I'll just briefly introduce myself and what we're going to cover today. So in my role at Century, I'm really lucky to work with an incredible team of ex-teachers. We also work closely with our colleagues who are current teachers, very much on the front lines, hopefully providing them some support as they implement new technologies like this into their existing curriculum. Obviously, this year has been incredibly challenging for anyone working in a school. I think that probably goes without saying, and we owe collectively a huge amount to teachers for the work that they've done and for the impact that this has had on students in their care. So one focus that has very clearly emerged over the course of this pandemic is that schools are really thinking about their digital strategy and how they can use data, the data that they have, to help their students to progress and close some of the gaps in their learning. So we are very fortunate today to be joined by colleagues from Forest School to share their journey with us. So in a moment, we will be hearing from Louise Golding-Hann, who is the head of eLearning. We'll hear from Edie Lobo, who is a Year 5 teacher, and we will also hear from Phil Peters, who is a Year 7 to 13 physics teacher. At the end, we will take some questions, so I'll be posing questions to all of our speakers today, so feel free at any point to ask questions in that Q&A function within Zoom. And looking at our attendees for this webinar today, it's really nice to see a good mix of people from, like I said, all over the world, but also schools that use Century and also schools that don't use Century. So welcome to those existing Century schools. You'll hopefully find this a really useful best practice sharing event. For those who are not so familiar with Century and haven't seen it before, I'm going to give a very quick overview now. So Century is the intelligent intervention tool that helps identify and overcome learning roadblocks. As you can see here, Century uses AI to recommend learning opportunities to students and provides teachers and leaders with insightful data to support interventions. So the personalized recommended path, this shows learners which topics they should study next based on their strengths and their areas for improvement. This is done through a combination of diagnostics, nuggets, which is our name for the micro lessons, and self-marking assessment questions. And we have content for English, maths and science from Year 3 up to Year 11. And this includes material for GCSE resits, higher GCSEs, and also functional skills coverage. And then on the teacher or tutor side of the Century platform, we provide advanced analytics and easy to use dashboards. So that's on a teacher level, a student level, and a leadership level. And should anyone on this in this webinar right now, if you want to find out more, I will share some information at the end as well. So without further ado, let's begin. So I'm going to hand over in just a moment to Louise Golding-Hann. So Louise is the head of eLearning and brought Century Tech to Forest School in January 2020. And again, please ask questions as we go through in the Q&A box if anything comes to mind. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, so as Helen has just mentioned, I am Louise Golding-Hann. I am the head of eLearning at Century School. I'm going to just share my slides with you here. So my background in education is I started life as a further education teacher. And I joined Forest in 2016. So before that, I was teaching computing, and then I went on to become head of eLearning at sixth form college. With my background of being a bit of a geek, coming into primary and secondary education was a bit of a learning curve. I joined a busy school. We had a lot of online subscriptions and a growing number of platforms. In 2018, when I went to the Vet Show, I was looking around to see what was available, and I came across Century, and it was the first of its kind that I saw that was using AI to bring data into schools. And obviously, being the geek that I was interested in looking at how that would work for us. So I would say that our timeline with Century so far has been what I would call a bit squiggly. It hasn't been maybe as straightforward as I liked in terms of getting it off the ground. So as I mentioned, I saw it in 2018. And then we had a presentation from one of the Century reps in about May, and that went really well. And we were thinking about going forward, but then things happened in school and we didn't quite get there. But when I went back to the Vet Show in 2019, I went and saw Century again at their stall there, and I was completely blown away with how much it had developed in that short period of time. So we brought Matt, who's on this call, he came in and he did a presentation to our leadership team in the spring term. And then we started our process in September 2020. So not quite as straightforward as I would have liked, but we got there. And then we started in January 2020 with a pilot in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our journey and what that looked like for us. And then we had a full rollout from March 2020, but I'm sure you know the reason for that, and I'll come across that one in a little bit. So as far as implementation goes, we started with a pilot, one in upper Key Stage 2, so in Year 5, and one with 4 classes in Key Stage 3. So the Century team came into Forest on 2 separate occasions. So one was for our Key Stage 3 pilot and the other one was for our Key Stage 2 pilot. So that was 2 days that the Century team came in, and what they did is they worked with the pupils in the day to onboard them onto the platform and get them to have a little go at doing some of the diagnostics, some of the nuggets. And I was in the classes with them as well as the teachers that were leading those classes. And what happened then is they worked with the students in the day, and then in the afternoon and our twilight session with our teachers, what we were able to do then is look at those classes with the teacher, and then the team were able to go through the data that had been captured by the students doing the diagnostics and doing some of the nuggets. And then what happened then was that we were able to have meaningful discussions in that twilight session about how would that work in a class? Would it be used for homework, or would it be used for pre-testing or post-topic testing? And also what it did is it gave the teachers access to the Century team for any kind of support that they needed at that time. So they were able to ask any questions about their subject, or ask questions about assigning nuggets, or about the data, or about looking at the different graphs and all of the different components of Century. So that was really, really helpful. So after this happened, what we then did is we went on to do a pilot with upper Key Stage 2. So we worked with Year 5 girls initially, and the plan was that we were going to work with Key Stage 5 girls. We were going to run the pilot from January until the March half term. And then when we came back after the Easter break, we were going to run the pilot with the Year 5 boys, and we were going to compare and contrast the data. What was really helpful in this class was that I had a class teacher who was championing Century. So she took it as her usual way of working. She started assigning nuggets as homework, and also as a kind of flipped learning model. So before the class, she would assign a nugget, and the kids would do it, and they would come in, and then she started using the platform to add her own video messages for people and ask them to add their own video messages as well. So that really supported the work that they were doing in class. And this is a certificate that I was able to present to them in March 2020. So you can see that they did 44 days. That was the length of their pilot, and we had planned on doing that with the boys as well. And you can see that the figures are staggering here. So they were able to complete over 3,000 nuggets, and they answered 23,000 questions correctly as well. And they were only a group of 23 girls. So they really, really went for it in that pilot time. So they got a lovely certificate, and they all got a cookie as a kind of well done for performing so well, and really, really having a go at it more than anything. So they really, really loved it. So then we did at the same time, we were also running our Key Stage 3 pilot. And this ran with a similar model as we could to the prep school one. So this is in year 7, we did this. And our year 7 intake in that year were 8 classes, 4 boys and 4 girls. So what we did is we took 2 boys and 2 girls classes as a gender split, and those classes were going to use sensory, and the other classes were going to just be taught as normal. And then we were going to flip them again after the Easter break and see compare and contrast the data. So I work with a team of teachers who we call e-reps here at Forest. So these are teachers who I meet with on a regular basis, and we develop their IT skills, and we work together to transfer knowledge back to their department so we can sort of spread it across the school. So with our e-reps, I picked the e-reps that were teaching our year 7 pupils, and they were able to onboard their classes as part of the pilot. So that was working really nicely, and we got English, Maths and Science teachers involved. They were involved in working with the sensory team as well. So everything was going swimmingly well. And the plan was, again, to compare and contrast. But then what happened is, obviously, we had a lockdown. So everybody sort of went into a bit of a panic stations. And what we did is, before we left school on the 23rd of March, I spent a week over in the prep school, and I was able with my year 5 champion to get all of our Key Stage 2 pupils logged on. So everybody from year 3 up, everybody got their login details for Sensory. We used single sign-on with Microsoft, so it was fairly straightforward. We got all the kids on. We were then able to add the courses as well for those pupils and to make sure that they knew how to access it. So with my e-reps as well, they also scaled up their onboarding. So the ones that were involved in the Key Stage 3 pilot had sort of scaled up and had seen how useful Sensory could be for their learners. So they started onboarding up to their GCSE classes, and the same for maths as well. We were able to onboard quite a lot of our maths classes from Key Stage 3 up to GCSE. I was able to send home some videos to our prep school parents, helping them to work with their child to be able to log on from home so that we could continue that learning when we weren't in school. I was able to go in, we use Teams as a school, so I went into Teams, and then I added Sensory as a tab in all of the Key Stage 2 teams so that the pupils wouldn't need to come out of the team in order to do their homework. We were trying to sort of keep it consolidated all in one place. And we onboarded the learning support staff as well. So it's really important for that team to be able to keep continuing supporting our pupils in the way that they do when they're in school. So that's where we were at until lockdown 1. And I'm just going to show you a quick video from one of our year 3 teachers called Kate. And she's going to talk about how she used Sensory with her pupils during both lockdowns and what she liked about it. So here's Kate.
Okay. So I teach year 3, and they are 7 and 8 years old. And we use Sensory tech primarily during both lockdowns when we were remote learning. It was very easy to upskill pupils with how to use it, how to use their pathway, how to access all the assignments that were set for them. So initially we would use it to set nuggets to reinforce what was done in a remote learning lesson, and thereafter entire lessons sometimes were set on there. They particularly like the nuggets because they involve videos that they can watch and a tutorial, and then they can double check. It was really good for us in terms of data. What I find particularly useful is the element of it that shows me which pupils need support, which pupils need more stretch and challenge, even down to it tells you how long somebody has spent on a task or on a nugget. And in that way we would ask them to go back and repeat it if they got a certain score that wasn't what we thought they should be achieving. We also used it to set homework in term time in the last lockdown when we came back, to keep things ticking over so they didn't forget how to use it. But mostly it's sort of come into its own in remote learning, but then you know, for most of our younger pupils, that's been sort of a third of their time at school almost, which is really important. They are less keen with the AI element, with their following their pathway, but it's helpful for us when parents especially are asking for more challenge, more stretch, in as much that it automatically adjusts to the individual pupils. So that's been really helpful, and being able to explain that to the parents has been really helpful. I also used it to record other types of videos, whether it was reading a story, or the children were reading stories or working on some kind of comprehension task, to enable us to make sure that everybody had accessed it, because you can track it, because you can view who's seen it and who spent time on it. So yes, it's been invaluable for Year 3.
So as you sort of heard from Kate there, it became a really, really useful tool during lockdown for our Year 3 teachers and above. And I thought maybe at this point it would be really good to talk about a little bit about the data. So as Kate mentioned, when she couldn't see her pupils, she was able to see the data about what they were doing with their homework tasks or maybe with their classwork tasks. So I know for Year 3, they used it for English during lockdown, and she was able to see who needed that extra bit of support, who needed that intervention, who needed a little bit more stretch. Our teaching continued during lockdown, so we also needed to make sure that our support continued as well. And this is where Sentry was really helpful for us, because the data that we received was really fast, it was clear, and it was insightful. So nobody needed to go searching around for it. It was there, it was presented to our teachers in such a way that it didn't need any additional analysis. It was all there ready for them to see. So any teacher could look at an overview of their class and see who was spending time on what, and address those who were spending maybe not enough time, or suggest different nuggets for people who had a little bit of extra time, who were finishing early perhaps. Also during this time, lots of Sentry made the platform available for free to everybody. So I know a lot of our staff whose children are not at Forest were able to take advantage of that in that way, and they were able to see the importance of that, and that sort of fed back and sort of closed the circle inside of school as well. I used it myself with my nephew who lives in Wales and studying for his GCSEs. He's a 15-year-old boy, so as you can imagine, he wasn't that impressed with me when I started making him study and setting him assignments, but I think it set him up quite nicely for his upcoming exams. So I thought we should probably look a little bit of data. So I wanted to show you, obviously we can't compare it like for like because we didn't start our pilot until January 2020. But this is roughly about 8 months worth of data. So you can see that the take up here, we've got the total time spent in those 8 months was about 23 days on English, about 2 months on maths, and about 1 month on science. I've done it up until August because we found that pupils were still using it during the school holidays as well, so I didn't cut it off at the end of the school year, which for us would be July. And here is the data so far for us for this year. So you can see we're about sort of like for like here. English and maths are about the same, but we've had huge amounts, we've had a huge leap, in science, and part of that reason is because the staff are really, really behind it. So where are we now? So obviously this year has been a little bit different. So we've also had another lockdown during this year. We had a local lockdown as well. So Sentry we were able to use it in those situations as well. Currently, we've got Sentry available on all of our school intranet pages so that pupils can use it and access it quite quickly. I post news articles on SharePoint about up and coming Sentry developments they're very highly read and liked by pupils, so that's really nice. And our data shows that teachers who use it in lockdown have continued that trend and they've continued to use it. We onboard our new staff joiners when they enter the school, and we onboarded our new Year 3 pupils in September as well. our year 3 pupils continue to use Sensory as their homework or their prep for after school, and Edie will probably talk about that in a little while. And we were really lucky quite recently to have early access to the new student dashboard. We were able to get early access to survey our pupils and then relay the thoughts that our pupils had back to the Sensory team. One of the really good things about this is at Forest, we tend to use very short video clips to give new features and new information to students. And as I fed this back to the Sensory team, I sort of said it would be really nice if we had a video. And then the next day there was a video for me in my inbox. And when the general release came for the new student dashboard, that went out as part of that release as well. So that was really nice. So where do we go next? So ideally, we would like to increase the use of diagnostics before and after a topic has been taught so that we can see what progress has been made. So there's work to be done there. Celebrate pupil achievement more. We could definitely do more for that. We've got some pupils who really, really love it, and it'd be great to highlight the work that they're putting in a bit more than we're already doing. Increase the use of Sensory in the senior school, in the English department. So that's some work that we are doing, and from September we'll be taking that up a little bit more. I'm active at the moment in the Sensory Ambassadors group, which is a group for like-minded ed tech teachers who discuss developments in the platform and ideas with other people who are around the world. And potentially we might look at creating some of our own courses, but this is obviously a really big undertaking. This is just a concept that we're exploring at the moment, but we might start pulling together maybe some of our own courses later on down the line. So what about the data then? So from September, we'll have 3 data-driven roles in school. So what that means for us is that we'll be relying on platforms like Sensory to give us the data that we need to make informed decisions about our pupil progress. We'll be using Sensory to further personalised learning, so using assignments in learning support, using in class to support pupil progress as well, and making earlier interventions as well. I've put a picture here of a new report that's just been released by Sensory called the Nugget Achievement Indicator. And what this does is this gives an indication of how our pupils are performing against other users of the platform. The report is named for us, obviously I've anonymised it for this, but we don't see other people's data. It's just tracking our pupils against other pupils who are doing the same nuggets. And it reports whether they're above or below the average for the users taking those nuggets as well. It also gives us the average score across these 3 subject areas. And the way that I sort of see this using this is I can give it to our class teachers or our subject heads, and then they can use it to discuss with pupils their progress. And the last thing that I really want to do with Sensory is to make sure that we are putting the data in the hands of the pupils so that we're empowering them to take more control over their own learning. So they can dig into their data, they can understand what it means. Their data belongs to them, and I feel that it's really empowering for them to understand what it is that they're looking at, and also using it to think, well, actually that's an area that I need to improve on, or I'm actually pretty good at that area, or I'm interested in this one, so I can go forward and look at that as well. So are we facilitating data-driven learning at Forest? Yes. Could we improve? Absolutely. So I look forward to the next steps.
Great, thank you so much, Louise. I'm really struck there that was a really detailed and well thought out implementation plan. Who could have predicted what would have happened? But yeah, definitely, yeah. You know, it would be weird if you'd planned that. So, but real credit to you and the team for adapting to the situation, because that must have been really challenging. So we're now going to hear from Edie Lobo, who is a Year 5 teacher. So she's going to be sharing her insights into using Sensory in the prep school. So over to you, Edie.
Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to take a moment just to share my screen with you. 1 second. Okay. Just for a bit of background on myself, so I'm Year 5 teacher at Forest Prep. I'm a relative newcomer, so I joined in the middle of lockdown in January this year. So I took over from Year 5 teacher who'd been involved in piloting Sensory Tech and was really quite keen on using the programme with the classes here. So I've been a little bit learning as I go, trying to make sure that we just keep up with it now that we've started it rolling. So I've a little bit picked things up as I've gone along. So I think I have more to learn, but so far I'm really enjoying it with girls, and the data has been incredibly useful, particularly in the time they've been away. So here's what it looks like for us in Year 5, how we've been using the programme. So initially, when the children were in school, this was a really good activity for them to do in morning form times. They would grab some iPads and they would just practice particular skills. And because they had their own personalised pathways, that could vary from pupil to pupil and adapt to them, which was great. We have a lot of really keen beans in our class, so there are those children that will just fly away with it and just go for it with the nuggets and just kind of go from strength to strength on it. During remote learning, this became quite regular work, so our timetable adjusted and we used it for particularly for comprehension skills and for grammar work. So some areas where we didn't perhaps have as much time to devote to it in lockdown. We've been using it as a diagnostics tool so that we would use it for tailoring the nuggets, but also for tailoring our in-class teaching. And I'll show you a little bit about how that worked in practice. And then I would use it to set specific work for children that need support, either evidence from class or evidence from previous nuggets. We will use it as prep, which is our word for homework. So to prepare for upcoming classes or to fill in some identified gaps from their learning. So first of all, diagnostics. I found these really useful. So here's some sort of anonymized diagnostics for my class. This was about vocabulary. So we try to do these at the start of a term or the beginning of a topic so that we know what we need to focus on. So with this data here I had about vocabulary, this actually backed up some of my own teacher instincts and things I was seeing in class about a specific student I felt needed reading support and encouragement to widen their reading. So this has led to some one-to-one reading and some particular work on helping her develop her vocabulary. We also had a verb diagnostic that we used in class as part of our grammar work, and that actually showed that the class had quite a few misunderstandings about tense. So when we were working through our English curriculum, every time we were doing a piece of writing, that became one of our success criteria or part of a checklist. So we knew that that was something the children needed to focus on, and it became part of their peer assessment. So they themselves started looking with their beady eyes, was everybody using the correct tense in their writing? So it's quite informative in that way. I really like the this menu here where you can kind of see the stretch and the commitment and where children need support and effort. So I will often use this sort of every few weeks. I will let children know who is really showing great commitment, and I will integrate that into our reward system. So I will say it out loud to the class. If there are children that I know is making lots of time and effort, then they will be given merits for their attitude to their learning. There will be ones with support, so then they might be ones where they might need some support from me or from a TA, just doing some small morning interventions. And then there are some in the needs more effort column who have had the shortest study time, where I have a quick chat with them and just see what's going on. And for one of them, it was really useful because then I discovered that she'd had her laptop taken away from her and was really struggling to use it on an iPad. So I had a quick message home and that got sorted out, and that's really improved. That quick chat, those dots have now sort of moved further up towards the other side because, once you tell a child face to face, they are keen as punch to make sure they impress you with what they're doing. So this I find really useful for keeping the children on track. Another thing that I thought was really useful to have for support was setting revision assignments. So I might set these, say, after we've had a parent meeting or towards the end of a topic or the end of a term. And this means that you can pinpoint those children that perhaps have not been doing so well in a particular topic. You can send them some recap assignments with a few nuggets and see if they've shown improvement in that area. And that's something I'd like to do a bit more regularly. As Louise said, it's really useful having the programme running on for this particular cohort through to August, because it means that if you say in your report, this child should spend some time reviewing X, Y, and Z, you can set those as nuggets and make sure that you actually back up what you say and make that happen for that child. So how was this linked to our in-school assessments and the assessments that we have on Century Tech? So I would use the data from that in tandem with things like our Rising Stars assessments that we might use for grammar. So I could have a look ahead, see what questions and topics would be coming up, and then I would tailor my nuggets to match that, so that over the course of a half term, I was ensuring that, say, prep nuggets were going to cover the topics that were needed, or perhaps the weakest areas. Particularly with lockdown, this became quite tricky with the squeeze on time. We had real timetable limitations and didn't want the children to be always in front of the computer doing things. So if we gave over a bit of English time, we would have one particular session where it was devoted to things like spelling and grammar or comprehension skills. So we could fill in some gaps there. So that was really useful. I've also used it kind of linked in with classwork. So for example, particularly during remote learning, this was more challenging for the children, I think. We were working on summarising articles for a debate we were preparing, and they found that quite difficult. So to help them with that, they had some more practice on reading skills that were to do with summarising. So we could use the nuggets to reinforce and develop the skills they were working on in class as well. So what I started out doing initially was setting assignments for the children. But now that we are back in school, I've moved it a bit more to adjusting their pathways instead and setting work that way. So I found quite useful just knowing that you could set it as a particular time, and it would have a sort of 2-week window where they could have a look at those nuggets, and you could set more than one nugget there. So I've been tailoring these to our curriculum, which has been changing a little bit as we had some new topics this year. So on my little timeline here of the pupil pathway for my class, you can see that I've picked things that may be coming up in a grammar assessment. I've picked something that I noticed was a weaker area in the children's writing, which is commas after fronted adverbials. I had something that was related to the writing work that we were doing that week. So when we were working on what's the difference between formal and informal, they had something to back that up. Or the spelling section, I might set a nugget that is going to reinforce what we're doing in our spelling word list as well. So I found this really useful in terms of you could take an existing course, but you could reorder it just to make it kind of fit and tailor to your curriculum. So that was really great. So things that I might like to see in the future, just because of the way that I use the system at the moment, and that might change, is that I often look at things in an assignment view or planner view, and it's quite nice if you can pop out the nugget then and have a look at the whole thing and preview it as you set that work. I find that quite a nice feature that I'd love to see. Another thing you can see is kind of see the weakest answers for a class for a particular nugget. I'd love to see that with the question so that I can then tackle that in class and build on that as well. So it's quite nice if you're the kind of teacher that likes to do whole class reviews rather than doing necessarily the same review with a few pupils separately. This is quite a useful thing that I'd love to see in the future. But I have to say I have very little to grumble about at all about Century Tech. I think it's very easy and straightforward to use. It's visually clutter-free. The questions and the video presentations are just so user-friendly, just the right length for the children, very easy for them to access, and the amount of data you get from them is really powerful and useful. So what are our plans for the future? Well, as some of our planning in Year 5 is relatively new due to a few changes in our topics, what I'd like to start doing is coming up with a coordinated plan of what I will be doing on Century Tech that accompanies the scheme of work, and essentially just integrate that into my planning documents. I'd like to liaise with the Year 6 team as well to divide up some of the courses on there. So at the moment we're enrolled on, say, a English reading course or a spelling and grammar course that covers Year 5 and 6. So we might discuss about which topics we're going to do when and divide that between us. Or we may perhaps switch courses, because you can have a separate Year 5 and Year 6 one, so that we are tracking that we're not repeating things, or that we are not missing out or leaving any gaps in the children's learning. The diagnostics I found very useful. Obviously things have been a bit up and down with the whole remote learning this year. So what I'd like to do again with my planning is make sure I have a really cohesive diagnostic timetable, so that I know that I'm going to do a diagnostic for a specific topic at a particular point in the term. The revision assignments I thought were really helpful, and I'd like to start doing that more. I'd like to maybe set that up as something that is reusable, so that I know that if I am definitely covering these maths topics in one term, it is just there, ready to roll, automatic for me. Because I know that as teachers, we are always really pushed for time. Anything that just makes something automatic and quite quick to go into is good news. And then I think I might adjust some courses to challenge as well, maybe set up perhaps some kind of challenge course for the children. Although there is that adaptation and things like that for the children, and the parents are aware of that, I think there's perhaps a little bit more I could do. I think one of the problems in lockdown is that I might set a nugget for my classes, and then a few of those students that are working really well might have already done it, and then I have to kind of think on my feet and find something new for them. So those are things that I might plan to do in the future as I'm learning to use Sensory Tech more and more. But so far I've really enjoyed it. The children are loving it. They love the feeling of success that they get from it. They really enjoy understanding how they are progressing and having that power in their hands, and I think that's a really powerful thing for them to have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Edie. Yeah, it's always really great to see how real teachers are actually using the platform in their everyday practice, you know, the data, the planning tools. So thanks for that. And also, as for the sort of the kind of ideal requests, those features that you were hoping to see, we are building new features all the time, as well as obviously building new content all the time. I can't exactly say what's coming next, but I can tell you there's always something coming next feature-wise. So yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. I am now gonna. Oh, sorry, Edie, you're on mute.
It's lovely that you're always adapting and adding new things and respond in that way. That's always really helpful for us. It's great.
Well, I'm so glad that we can support. So I am now going to pass over to Phil Peters, who is a physics teacher in the senior school. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Helen. So as people have said, I am a physics teacher in senior school. I initially got involved with Sensory because I was one of the E-reps that Louise spoke about earlier on, who was teaching Year 7 at the time and was volunteered to help out with the pilot program with Year 7. So when this launched with my Year 7 class, at the time I was teaching a Year 7 biology topic. So initially they were onboarded with a Key Stage 3 biology course. My class was chosen not just because I was an E-rep, but because they were also, their English and maths teachers also happened to be E-reps. And with this biology topic, initially they performed a diagnostic, and that was chosen because we just finished that particular topic. So it was a revision activity before they did their test. And then after using it in that way, and they did the test and getting their feedback on it, we moved on to the next topic, and I decided to give them the diagnostic for the new topic at the beginning, just to see what they already knew. And it was really useful to see, actually, that a large number of them had recalled quite a lot from Key Stage 2, and therefore I could tailor the teaching of the topic to start from the things that they didn't already know. But it became obvious as we were using it more and more with these diagnostics as we went through the various topics later on in the year, that it was going to be necessary to tailor a Key Stage 3 programme, because the order in which we teach things here at Forest isn't a generic Key Stage 3 scheme. It's our own that we wrote. And so as part of that, in Century, it's possible to take one of their standard courses and completely tailor it. So you can remove nuggets and indeed whole topics from the course that you're not going to be teaching, and develop your own bespoke teaching pathway. And having done that, then again started using the diagnostics at the start of topics to inform how I would then teach the topic. And this is something I have continued to do. I don't teach Year 7 this year, but I have continued to do with other classes. So as Louise said, we started with just Year 7. The intention had been just to stick with Year 7. But with the national lockdown looming, we did it and decided it would be really useful to onboard other classes. I presented it to the physics department must have been the start of March last year. Quickly, as a department, decided that it would be incredibly useful for Year 9 to 11. So I set about sorting out courses for Year 9s, because again, they start GCSE, but they don't do much of it. So we have to tailor make a course for Year 9. And then also we do IGCSE. So I had to make some slight tweaks to the IGCSE course. As part of this expansion program, I had to train my colleagues in how Century worked and how they could set nuggets and so forth. And the head of science at the time got wind of what we were doing in physics and decided it was a great tool. Could I possibly train the whole of the science department? As a result of that, I ended up having to self-isolate, so I ended up having to deliver this training remotely. And we then trained the whole of the science department before the first lockdown on how to use Century and onboard classes. The consequence of this meant that when everybody else went into lockdown, everybody in science was able to set all of their students nuggets and diagnostics through Century, so that we didn't have to suddenly completely redress the way we were going to teach initially. So with that expansion, again, the initial idea was to use the diagnostic at the end of the topic as revision, so they'd have a bespoke revision pathway to prepare for the topic test. I then, through the trials I had been doing, encouraged my colleagues to start using it at the start, because it was a real asset to see actually what you needed to teach. And everybody started to take this on board, and particularly in the physics department, we have now become so data-driven by Century in the way we teach that everybody's doing the diagnostics at the start, and it means that we have ended up taking somewhat shorter time periods than we had before to cover some of our topics, because we're not starting from where we used to start, which was like we assume they don't know anything and teach everything. Now we test what they know and we only teach the bits that they don't. And we use Century to support with that by setting homework assignments and in-class assignments of the relevant nuggets for the topics we want to cover. And that work really started during the remote learning period and has continued this year. And with Year 11, our focus became, because we didn't know initially when lockdown began what was going to happen with grades, we decided we would set all of the diagnostics for the whole course to Year 11s, so that they would end up with a bespoke revision plan that they could follow independently. And as teachers, we would be able to intervene if they were still struggling with ideas. Exams were cancelled. We continued to set other things as stretching options. And then eventually, after they completed some assessments in the first half of their third term last year, they went off and did things to prepare for A-level. And that took us into the summer, and year 9 to 11 carried on using it for the whole of the first lockdown. When we returned in September, we decided that it was so useful that we would continue to use it and continue to expand the use of diagnostics. Personally, I don't only just use it at the start and end, but I have it in the middle of the topic as well, just so I can see, actually, do I need to intervene at this point to see that things are going in as they should. And it's continued to be used in lessons and homework for this. So sometimes I'd set a diagnostic homework, sometimes they do it in a lesson. On top of this, I took the decision to expand the use of Century Tech to year 12. So we were faced with a year 12 cohort that had largely not done GCSE work since April. And so ordinarily we would give them a baseline test at the start of the year. But on top of that, this year, we also decided that for the topics that as they were beginning the year 12 topic, we would set them the GCSE diagnostic on Century Tech. And this has been really useful for them because it's shown them what they'd already forgotten from the GCSE content. And it's been really useful for us because we can see what they've forgotten and we can say, right, if you go to the Century Tech pathway, you can fill the gaps in your knowledge from GCSE before we start going on to the year 12 content and increasing the level of difficulty. And that has been really useful with this current cohort of year 12s. So it might be nice. So Edie presented that the year 5 students generally love Century Tech. I've termed this the Marmite effect with the senior school. So students fall into the camp of loving it or hating it when they're first introduced to it. What I have found, particularly, so here we keep year 10 classes in science into year 11. So the year 10s that I had that started using Century last year, now year 11 and still using Century, when year 10 they were asked what they thought of it, they hated it. They didn't want to use it. Felt it was a waste of time. Come now to year 11 and revision and preparation for assessments, and all of a sudden they can't get enough of it. They love the fact that they can do the diagnostics and they get their own bespoke revision plan. And other year groups still fall into this camp. They either love it or they hate it, up until it comes to a time for revision, it seems. And then as soon as you say, right, do this diagnostic, see what you know to prepare for your revision, and all of a sudden they love it. Okay. That being said, that's not true of all students. So some of my students actually really love just that, having access to something where they can just get on and do whatever they please and know it's going to have an impact in a positive way. One thing that they are really adamant they don't like, but as a teacher I love, is that when they're doing a diagnostic, they don't get told what they've got right and what they've got wrong. Because implicitly, if they get it wrong, they get recommended and they get on their pathway. And it seems to me that no matter how many times I say this to them, that's your cue that you need to work on something, they still insist on it's not right. We should be told whether we're right or wrong. But I don't actually want Century to change that. I think it is really great that they don't just get given the answers. And your students may have similar views. My plans for the future, so that's the end of my slides, but plans for the future. Obviously, I have started to use it with A-level classes to recap GCSE knowledge, but it would be really great if Century would consider writing A-level courses so that we could use it as a diagnostic tool with Key Stage 5 as well as Key Stage 3 and 4.
Great, thank you, Phil. Like I said before, we are always developing features and also content. Can't say too much on it, but we've got English, Maths and Science year 3 to year 11. We are always developing new things, so I will say that for now. But it's great to hear how you've been using our GCSE stuff with your year 12s. And on the point of, you know, finding out the correct answer, it's something that we internally debated as well. You know, students want to know why they're wrong because it feels good, and you think, oh, if I just see the right answer, I'm going to figure out what I did wrong. Whereas sort of the research, the psychology says that actually it's a false positive. You know, you see why it's wrong, you recognize the right answer, it doesn't actually help you to learn. We have developed a new feature, which your students may or may not have seen yet, which is the reveals. Have you come across those?
Yeah, so my year 11s discovered the reveals, but they didn't like the fact that they were limited to only 3 a day. And I pointed that to them. But actually, if you keep working, you'll reveal the answer anyway. So although you've only got 3, actually, the important thing is you keep working, not that you know the right answer.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's a little bit of a compromise with the students. You can see some of the correct answers, but, you know, use it wisely. But thank you so much for that. We are almost out of time, but we do have a little bit of time for a quick Q&A session. So anyone who has burning questions that they have not yet put in the Q&A box, now is your chance. If I could just ask, so Phil, thanks for keeping your camera on. Can Louise and Edie, if we can get you guys back. We've had a question so far that actually I would like to pose to all of you. So let's see. Okay, so Clara asked in the Q&A, so we're looking to purchase Century for use in the new academic year. What would you do differently if you were to implement this platform again? Thank you to Louise, who's answered that in the chat. Does Edie or Phil, do you have anything that you might do differently moving into the next academic year?
So I would say it's kind of a bit what I've sort of said in my presentation. I think I would look ahead over the year, and in terms of any changes into the curriculum, and really map it out against that. I'd probably go a bit more the bespoke approach that Phil did with his students in terms of looking at that year ahead and just tailoring it to that, because I think there's lots of options in terms of flexibility, in terms of what fits with your topics. So that's probably what I would do. And then just also work with other staff in my year group and perhaps the year below and above to have some conversations with them about what has been covered before, just to see, you know, if they feel there are some gaps that need to be filled, or with the transition, say, to from year 5 to year 6, are there common things that crop up year after year where they would love us to have a bit of focus on that? Then I'd probably build that into my plans.
Great, thank you.
I don't, and this is going to sound possibly a little bit arrogant, but I don't think actually I'd do that much differently. I probably can start earlier with the diagnostics, I think, rather than, obviously when I was onboarded, it was halfway through the year rather than the start. But I think going forward from September, it would be really useful to just start with the diagnostics and plan from there.
Yeah, I think diagnostics, because they're fairly unique to Century, I think people sort of gloss over them at the beginning, and then when you start experimenting, you realise, oh, this is incredibly useful. So yeah, thank you guys for your insights on that. There's another question in the Q&A. It's quite a long one, but I'll read it out from Charlie. So thank you for sharing your insights. The pandemic has further heightened the importance to encourage learners to be more independent. I can see how Century is designed to encourage independent learning, but could you share any strategies or best practice that you've used for students who have less of a propensity towards learning? Yeah, so who wants to field this one?
I'm happy to field this one because I having tried it with so many classes, I can say what things work. So initially, when I introduced it to my year 10 boys, they did a diagnostic and they hated it and didn't want to use it. Edie showed the intervention graph on one of her slides that you get. I pulled that up because it doesn't show names in front of the year 10 boys. And as soon as they saw the little dots in the bottom left-hand corner, needs more effort, all they wanted to know was who it was and how they could get better. And just having that competitive element that was completely anonymous, they had no idea who it was, all of a sudden made them want to do it. So introducing the element of competition works for some classes. But what I have found generally, I'll be honest, is that most classes, you give them the diagnostic and then you tell them that they now have a revision pathway, which is where it's come into its own, that's bespoke to them, and they are motivated to do it themselves. With my year 7s, they just loved it, so they were just all over it. They had no problems there. The year 12s have taken a little bit more convincing, but they've sort of realised actually that they missed a lot at the end of year 11, and they, I think, are still astonished by how much they have forgotten since then. So actually using it to show them that has been really powerful and encouraging them to be independent.
Yeah, definitely. We're hearing that a lot recently, you know, for the students who should have done GCSEs and didn't, you know, they've missed that huge benchmark of, you know, where am I in terms of what I've learned. So it's good that you managed to get your difficult year 12s a bit more motivated with it. Louise, Edie, anything that you want to add to that? So those students who aren't necessarily so independent?
Yeah, so just a couple of things from me. One thing that I have seen quite a lot of our staff doing is bringing up that graph. I don't know whether Phil put the word out, but I've seen, when I walk around, I often see that on a board at the front of the classroom. So it does bring that little element of class competition into there. One of the other things that has been beneficial for, but also the fact that you can clone the courses and, for example, give a year 7 child maybe a year 6 course if they're working in the learning support areas, then that's been incredibly useful for us as well, because the learning support team can tailor it to that child, and maybe even if it's just at a topic level, they can take the topic out and give it to that child, and the child doesn't know that they're working at a different level, but it also gives the support team a chance to make those interventions as well. So for the students who are maybe not as likely to do it as they were, that little bit of competition does help, but also it's just because you can see the whole class. I think I can't sort of stress how important that's been for our teachers to be able to see very quickly, without doing tons and tons of analytical work, where the students are in that class. It's just been incredibly useful.
Yeah, I would add that graph is really useful. I think praise, basically the ones that are really achieving highly on it, and more about the commitment. I like that phrase, commitment to learning, because it shows it's about them doing things, not just about achieving. Then I will just pile praise on those. And I think it's just useful because I think sometimes children don't always have an awareness of what the standard is, and they have in their own minds their perception of this is good enough. And actually when they see that graph, they have a bit of an epiphany moment. So I think that is very useful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's my favorite graph as well. So I'm glad that we're all sort of similarly geeking out over the same graph. Well, thank you so much, everyone. So we have 1 minute left, so I think probably no more time for questions. So who is sharing slides right now? If we could just pop up the details at the end. Oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you to Phil, to Louise, to Edie, and to everyone who's joined us today. If you do want to find out more information, you can get in touch. So we've just left our sort of handles on this slide. And if you're in the south, you want to talk to Matthew. If you're in the Midlands, you want to talk to Paul. And if you're in the north, you want to talk to Deborah. So I will just leave this slide up for, just a minute or so, just so people can note everything down that they need to. But thank you to everyone one final time for joining us today, particularly our colleagues at Forest School for their incredible insight.
Thank you.